Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. We are going to wait for a few minutes while everybody logs in. We're sitting here with William. How are you doing today, William?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for answering.
Thank you for responding. That's nice. Thank you for breathing. I mean, I appreciate you breathing and letting blood, flow through your veins. I appreciate
Thank you. That's something that I do fairly naturally. I'll take credit for that. Yeah. Well, we're excited about today. I feel like we've been building up to this. We've got this, we're waiting for tons of people to log on, and we've got great people here with us today. So it's going to be a great presentation.
Good.
I
Well,
am stalling. Can you tell? I'm just
no,
stalling.
no, no. People, I mean, that's the thing about webinars is it's like anything else. People have the best intentions of being on time to things like a conference session, but usually what happens is they get stopped in a hallway or they have to use a restroom or whatever, and then they get there about 5 minutes, 7 minutes late. It's the same thing for webinars. Like we have the best intentions of showing up at 1 or 2 or whatever the time is, and then all of a sudden it runs around and it's like, well, get that one last email that I got to crank out before I can do this thing. It's always, for me at least, it's like 3, 4 minutes. You know what? Give people grace. Let them and even the people that are on the call, those that are lucky enough to show up on time, they can relax a little bit because everyone's day is pretty intense. So it gives them kind of a moment of respite to just kind of breathe,
Oh yeah.
uh, take stock of, okay, I don't have to do that other thing on the list right now. I can just kind of lay back, listen, learn, ask
Uh,
questions, all that stuff.
I find nothing more therapeutic than the blank screen that says you are waiting for the organizer to start the webinar. Because it makes me feel like I'm doing something, but
I'm here. I'm here. I mean, I don't know
I'm
about these other
here
people. I'm
early.
here.
Well,
Not this program could, but the other programs not go to webinar. They have music and stuff, and that stuff
oh
drives
yeah.
me crazy. I'd
Oh,
rather just look at a
no.
blank screen of just like, okay, there's a calm. I can just kind of sit here and just. But then again, I listen to a lot of music during the workday. A lot of people don't. But I listen to, when I'm not on calls, I have music playing nonstop. So it's always, loud and kind of out of control because I work best in that environment.
Sort
But
of
so when I get,
chaotic. Yeah.
yeah, so when I get a moment of calm, it's like, wow, this is what quiet feels like. This is
Try this
interesting.
more.
Huh?
Yeah.
No.
I love the mute options that they let you mute the music, but as soon as you press mute, there starts this sort of siren-like buzzing
Mm,
over and over and over again, and you realize you made
yes.
a terrible mistake. But
Yes.
well, I
Let's
think
get
we
started.
are doing
Let's do
well,
it.
so we're gonna get started. Okay, so how do you solve the problem of recruiting Gen Z? And I mean, the title explains itself. For the most part, we're gonna run through with William. Oh, and there's my frozen screen. Can you see it blinking, William?
Nope. You're good.
Nope, there we go. Okay, so before we get started, we're going to go through housekeeping. You are in listen only mode. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. Don't be shy. Ask questions. Use the side panel in your little go-to webinar docking panel to talk to William. Share. Use the RDaily hashtag to share all over social media. People can still join. They do not have to wait for it to end. And we're recording. You will receive a copy of this slide deck and the recording after the webinar. So please keep an eye on your inbox.
And it is blinking, so go
Is
ahead and
it?
just, yeah, it's okay. Just pass it
I
over
don't
to me.
know. Okay, I am
Well,
going to,
I
here we
would just
go.
say that, God hates you, but that'd probably be a little strong. So we'll
I
just
don't,
kind of say maybe you're having a bad technology day.
I
Let's,
think I am. I think I
okay.
am.
Don't worry about it.
There you go.
Don't worry about it. It's Tuesday.
Okay, you have my mouse and my keyboard, so Feel free to, hopefully it won't blink on you whenever you open it into presentation mode.
Well, you know, it probably will, but don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what's up. I think it needs an update. It continues to crash on me, PowerPoint. So,
Hmm. Again, maybe it just hates you. Okay. So, presentation mode. It's, yeah,
you
I
go
don't,
to
you still got your
slideshow
mouse.
at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, do I? Okay.
Yeah.
So you should have it now. You'll go to the slideshow at the beginning, at the top panel, and then
Hmm.
press from beginning at the far left, the little icon with the.
Yeah. It's not letting me have control. Like
That is
I'm moving
very
my
weird.
mouse. It is, but that's okay. Those of you that are
Okay.
listening, stick with us for a moment.
Thanks for hanging in there. Okay. Do you have it now?
Make another attendee the presenter.
There you go. Yes. And okay, you should have it now. There we are. So what this is going to do is give you the screen.
Okay.
Um, that's the problem here. I can give you my mouse and use my screen, but
Okay,
if I
let's do
make
that.
you the presenter, it gives it your screen.
Yep,
So now we
yep,
see your screen.
great.
Yeah.
Then I'll have to use your mouse.
Okay. You won't. Okay. All right. So let's switch back over. Apologies, everyone. Was unexpected. All
Wait a
right.
minute,
So
we planned this. Just go
yeah,
ahead.
no, we did.
All right.
Okay, let's try this again and see if it's still blinking.
Okay.
All right. I don't know what the.
Just
I'm starting to want to curse. We can't do that
don't
here.
don't do that. Don't do that. Avoid cursing. Just
All
go
right.
see if
So we can just go through this without having it in a presenter screen. How do you feel about that? So it doesn't go crazy and blink on us.
um that's fine. You'll just manage the
Okay.
slides. I'll just say next
Okay,
slide.
that works. That works.
Okay.
So I'm going to take
All
the
right.
mouse away from you.
I've never had it.
I don't know. It's very strange. Anyways, we are here with great people, and huge apologies, great people. We did not know that our screen was going to fritz out. Um, this is an amazing company to work with. We've been working with them for how long now, William? At least the year, much longer, um,
Forever. Forever. Great people.
forever.
So a couple things as you back up into because the audience didn't get to see the plan, the second slide. You might want to back up because it was blinking and just make sure that they understand that. The most important thing, y'all, and it's really critical to pretty much the success of all conference sessions, seminars, webinars is y'all asking questions. You showed up, you registered, thank you. You showed up, thank you. And some of you are working and doing other things and just kind of listening in the background, and some of you have specific questions. I, as a speaker, am very comfortable impromptu. So ask questions. I mean, you've probably attended a million webinars like us. You can go into the question box, ask them. Ashley's going to monitor that and then interrupt me and will ask me the question, and I'll try my best to answer your question. Obviously, you'll get a copy of the recording after this, and then we can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm going to be Larry Ellison. I'm going to be next slide. Next slide, please.
That works. That works. So our next slide is our great people slide again, and just a
Yes.
huge thanks to this amazing talent platform. We love to work with you. Check them out. Make sure to check your email out at the end of this webinar when we send you a copy of the slide deck and the recording, because they do have some educational materials to share with you there.
Yeah, the big thing about great vendors like great people, is these things wouldn't be put on. Like we wouldn't do this webinar
No, they
if
make
it
it
weren't,
possible.
yeah, if not for them, right? We wouldn't be able to do it. And so financially, they make it happen. They also make it free for people to attend and things like that. So, it's important that we're gracious, but also as an audience, if you just, as you in your travels and as you see them, they're really, really wonderful people to interact with. and also really great technology. So there's that. And we'll go to the next
Absolutely, you're
slide.
prompted. Okay, let's see here. And as you know, your expert today is William Tincup. We've spent quite a bit of time talking. If you don't know who he is, he's the president of Recruiting Daily. You should know who he is, right? Right? Are we supposed to know everyone?
Yeah.
Your celebrity.
So, yeah, yeah, HR famous. That's great.
Yeah.
Um, they, I think the most important thing, and I hate some of this, like a lot of you, there's a humility in, there should be a humility in expertise. The reason I'm curious and got curious about Gen Z is probably October, November of last year. I started thinking about millennials. I started just kind of really deep thinking about like how we got, all of us, uh, got kind of blindsided by millennials. And like, what were the forces? Like, why did that happen? What led up to that? And as best I could find, research, and extrapolate was that we thought millennials, as recruiters in HR, we thought millennials would essentially behave like Gen X. Maybe some nuanced differences with the generation that comes around that's next, but really they behave more or less exactly like we did. And we couldn't have been further from the truth. And it isn't a right or wrong. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of, in talking about different generations, they kind of go down this crazy path of there's one right generation or a wrong generation, or right things that happen with a generation or wrong things that happen with a generation. And such is not true. It's just that's what makes them special. That's what made us special. It made boomers, the greatest generation, etc. Keep going. Uh, uh, and so as I researched and thought about millennials, I started thinking about, well, we're getting to the point where we really need to be thinking about the generation that comes after millennials, which has been labeled Gen Z. And we'll get into some of the details around Gen Z, but the genesis of this research comes from this place of, okay, I believe we were blindsided, and it took us years to kind of figure out, like, what happened here. And I didn't want for us to be blindsided by Gen Z. And every time I've done this a version of this presentation about 6 or 7 times this year at different places. And before I do the presentation again, I go and research again and see what's been written in the interim. And why I do that is so that the research is not stale, A, kind of common sense, but B, I do that also to learn new things about this generation. Like, okay, well, and people are putting out great research, almost weekly now about Gen Z, and so we're constantly learning. And so the good news is, and we're going to be constantly learning about this generation. So the learning, the breadth and depth of it, we're just starting. And but that's where this kind of comes from. Is I didn't want us to be blindsided by millennials, and I wanted to learn like what makes them tick, what makes them different, what makes them special, what makes them even different from millennials, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So next slide.
Um, oh, yeah, I thought I had it fixed, but we're just going to have to continue on like we are. So we
It's
have the
okay.
agenda. William, I'm going to mute and let you go,
That's
and
fine.
I'll interrupt you with questions. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
No worries, no worries, and just don't start drinking this early. That's one of the lessons here. So
Too
we're going to
late.
talk about we're going to talk about millennials because I think it's good for us to back up and make sure that we all kind of see the world through the same lens and understand um, how millennials kind of change the game and how they continue to change the game. And we're going to get into what we know about Gen Z so far, differences between the two, most important for y'all, and the reason you'll show up for webinars and seminars and conference sessions is to get something out of it. You're using an hour of your day to learn something, so you want to be able to take it back to the office and back to work. So we'll get into the takeaways and what you can do with that. Q&A. Q&A is all the time. We have a special time at the end, but we want you to ask questions at any given point. And contacting me is about as easy as going to Google and typing in my name, and it's pretty easy to find me. So let's go into millennials. Next slide. Okay. So we start with the definition of what is a millennial, and the reason for that is generations are by definition about every 15, 20 years, and different people define them differently. So there is no standard, if you will, from one expert to another. They might use different definition, but I wanted to make sure that we used a definition so that we could kind of talk about it. So what is a millennial? Okay, so what we're going to define a millennial is born between the years of 1980 to 1995. Now, what's interesting about that, as we look at it, is right now you're dealing with millennials. The oldest of millennials are getting close to 38, 39 years old. They're nearing their 40s. So what's great about that is, well, when you near your 40s, things tend to change. But also the youngest millennials are still college, entry-level position, college recruiting, etc. So on the far end, you've got people in management, mid-management, leadership, founders, etc. You got people further along in their career, and then the youngest millennials at the beginnings of their career. And so some of this data that we look at will also be important as you recruit, as you still recruit millennials. Next slide. So again, we're agreeing on terms at this point, general recruiting practices and the things that we know. Again, it took us a while to learn these things, but the things that we know that work is the transparency in the way that we think of transparency. They come to the table expecting it and not just desiring it on one level, but just like, why wouldn't you be transparent? So they come from a different place when it comes to transparency. The more transparency we give them, the better. As it relates to feedback, they want actionable, brutal feedback. They want feedback to actually mean something, not just be kind of glossy, non-substantive feedback. Career pathing, and we'll get into this in a second, but it's a lot of what's next, and that's vastly different than Gen X. So Gen X probably wouldn't have asked the question of what's next, and with millennials, it's table stakes. That's a normal question. Training, they desire, expect training, praise. It isn't praise in a way that we think of praise. It's praise in that we want to know if they're doing something awesome. They want to know how you're going to recognize that they're doing something awesome, how you'll tell other people that they're doing something awesome. And then the last one on this is texting beats email. Texting for Gen X can be really personal, right? If I don't know you, why are you texting me? Whereas with millennials, texting is normal. Hi, my name's Jan. I work at Corn Ferry. I have this job I think would be great for you. I'd like for you to look at the link, and if you think so, then I'd love to schedule some time with you and kind of walk through what your career goals are, and that type of text to a millennial, normal, and natural. Whereas with boomers and Gen X, delete. I don't know you. Why are you texting me? Delete. And again, different. We didn't expect that. And again, now we should commonly, and it should change our behavior in how we recruit millennials. Next slide. Okay, so transparency. What we have to be as recruiters and in HR is understand that what their desire and get ahead of their desire in terms of transparency before they ask the question. So instead of waiting for them to ask, I guess we should say, okay, here's what's going to happen in the process. You'll meet with, the team. After that interview, you will then meet with, and then, kind of walking them, then you're going to take a behavioral assessment. You'll take a criminal background check, or we'll do a criminal background check. You'll take another personality assessment, or this, that, and another, like literally explaining to them the funnel. And at any point that they get knocked out of the funnel, explaining to them, maybe not to the detail of why they got knocked out. Of course, the more you can be transparent there, the better. But giving them the stages. It's almost like like Domino's or FedEx at this point, where in the process where you are. They expect that. The more we can provide that for them, the better off they'll be, the better off we'll be. Feedback. We've got it's not the resume that goes in the folder, i.e. trash can, or the ATS, which, is another way to say trash can. We've got to be able to give them feedback. Hey, listen, you applied for a job that really at MBA, we didn't make it required, but we would love, and the candidates that have applied, all of them have MBAs. And so we're going to now look at those deeper, but that's why you got knocked out. Like it's brutal. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. I'm not trying to cripple you, but I'm letting you know specifically why you didn't make it to that next stage. And I know it's hard. I know it's difficult because of volume. I know it's difficult because of we don't want to hurt. We don't want to run the risk of hurting a relationship. But the difficulty in this isn't about us. It's that they require it. They need our feedback. They expect our feedback. So we have to kind of change with millennials. We have to change around their needs. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So career pathing, I'm straight up Gen X. In the late 80s, early 90s, if I would have got into an interview and asked the recruiter what's next, they would have thrown me out of the office. It's not a natural question. It wasn't a natural question then. In fact, it would have been seen as inappropriate or disrespectful. But it's table stakes now. For millennials, that's a normal question. It's like, okay, I get it. This job, you want me to be a project manager, 9, 18 months, be successful, what's after that? Like, that's a normal question. And in fact, if they don't ask that question, we should preemptively tell them what's next. Okay, so listen, there's 3 paths after this. It's either career, it's either, global, it's moving up one step to becoming a senior project manager. It's like giving them, here's the pathways. So whether or not they ask or whether or not they don't, we've got to both know the pathways and then be able to explain them. Now, people that have been in this game for a long time will look at this and go, sounds a lot like internal mobility. It's because it is. This is something that got pushed into recruiting. It used to be something that we dealt with after onboarding for sure. You got hired, you started your job, you got into your bit, you started, doing good work, and then people started to kind of think of like, what's next for you? They're in the recruiting process. Again, this is something that we didn't expect, we didn't foresee, and this is something they expect. They come to the table expecting you, both in HR and in recruiting, to tell them, what's next. They'll frame it with different words, but essentially it's internal mobility, career mobility. What's next? What's after this? Again, I think as it relates to training. Uh, uh, Training in the way that we see it here, it says feedback, but basically it's training, is they know their skill set. What they want to know is how you're going to make their skill set better. Okay, so when we think of it, it's like the old-fashioned model of, hey, listen, I know what I'm good at. I know that, but I also know what I want to learn. And training can be making your strengths better, or focusing on your weaknesses and making those better, or a combination of both. Now, an interesting thing, and just a side tangent, we can learn what they want to be trained upon all the way back into sourcing. So when we source them, we can ask questions. When we recruit them, we can ask questions. When we're hiring them, we can ask questions. And when we onboard them, we can validate all that we've learned. So at each stage, they said, I want to learn Python. Okay. So the moment that they start onboarding, we can put them on a path of learning Python. So they expect that level of discipline in our training, development, skill development. They expect that type of not just personalization, but our dedication to them getting better. And this flies right in the face of what we've believed with all of our hearts as boomers and Gen X, is what if we train them and they leave? Or as we train them and they leave, we invest in them, they leave. It really they flipped it on us, and it's what if we don't train them and they stay? And so that's how we have to think about training and skill development. And so we need to be more aggressive, because they expect it, but also we're not going to be able to get the best talent if we don't have great training plans. So next slide. So praise is kind of rewards and recognition dressed up. They know where they do a good job, and they know potentially where they've kind of not done a great job. Customizing that praise to them. How do you want your praise? Would you want your praise more publicly? Do you want it privately? How do you want us to recognize that you did a great job? And again, this has historically been something that HR has dealt with. Rewards and recognition, or total recognition, etc. This is absolutely something in recruiting that we've got to be able to talk about. We've got to be able to talk to people about how we, either our value system or software or programmatically, how we interact with praise. How do we recognize what you've done well? And then how do we tell people about it, or how do we communicate that? Again, kind of a HR thing getting pushed into recruiting. You saw that internal mobility got pushed into recruiting, training and development got pushed into recruiting. Now rewards and recognition got pushed into recruiting. Not programmatically, and not the management of the software, but we've got to be able to answer questions as recruiters that we've never answered before. And the last thing on millennials, before we get to Gen Z and some of the other differences, is texting. And again, for those Gen X, and again, when you talk about generations, you make generalizations. And so if you're a Gen X and you hear me say that texting seems personal, but that's not you, that take generalizations, and as we talk about generations, with that line of thinking of, you're not everyone's going to fit. You know, and that's every person kind of might have a little bit of millennial and a little bit of Gen Z, or a little boomer in their Gen X. But texting recruiters, texting today, they're doing it already, because what recruiters have learned is they can't get the candidates to respond. You know, faxing, yeah, doesn't work. Smoke signals, out of the question. Email, voicemail, nobody responds to that stuff. Texting, got a pretty good chance of getting responses with millennials, so, and with Gen Z, as you'll see in the future. But you have a pretty good chance of actually getting responses, especially if it fits the job, the opportunity fits. So texting has displaced. It's just a different medium, and but you've got to do different things inside the medium to be effective. But it's prioritized. It's candidates, millennial candidates prefer that communication than any other communication. Next slide. So as you get through first 11 slides, here's the three things that we want to make sure that as we recruit millennials, we remember. What's next? Internal mobility. How are you going to develop my skills? Training and development. How are you going to recognize, praise me? Total recognition. 3 HR, hardcore, hard-boiled HR things that have been brought into recruiting to be able to answer questions. And again, the better we are at asking and answering those questions, the better off we'll be at attracting that talent. So we got to be able to attract the talent, we got to be able to answer the question. If we can't answer the question, we have a harder chance of recruiting. And this is true in even tighter talent markets like Manhattan, or the healthcare sector or Silicon Valley or something like that. And they'll just, if you can't answer the question, it's almost like an IQ test. I'm going to ask you as a candidate, what's next? And you're going to stall or not be able to answer the question. I'm not going to respond to you anymore. I'm not going to interact with you anymore, because you clearly, if you don't know what's next, why would I go work for your firm? That's how they think of it. And I'm not necessarily thinking that that's a bad way of thinking about it. You know, they might have that right. We actually should know what's next for them, and at least have ideas of what's next for them. All right, so these three things, keep these very much in the back of your mind as you recruit millennials. Very important, either preemptively or reactively, to be able to ask and answer these questions. Let's go on to the next slide, 13. So this is important because people have asked, as we get into Gen Z, which is next, the job search and how the job search changed from boomers to Gen X to millennials, is they do a lot more research than we do. They have access to a lot more research, right? So some of it's just the internet, but they Google, and every person that you've included into the recruiting process, they look them up. So they Google. Typically, they'll go through several pages of Google just to see what the company's about, lawsuits, anything negative or positive, awards that are won, and things like that. In Glassdoor, they're really looking for 80-20, 70-30 of positive sentiment, negative sentiment. If it's all positive, they don't believe it. If it's all negative, they don't believe it. So there's a mix that's what they're looking for. And the third one is really interesting. There's no laws or rules around it. Is that they can talk to your former employees, and they do routinely talk to your former employees. So people that, it's really easy in LinkedIn to run the search of people that have worked there, and it's really easy to send them a message. And the message doesn't have to be a thesis. It can be, hey, I'm thinking about applying or going to work for this company. It looks like you worked for them for a decade. Would you go to work for them again? Do you like them? How was your exit? Did they treat you nicely? Like they can do that. They do that. It's important for us to understand how they search so that we understand kind of how they come to the table with questions, right? So before we get on to Gen Z, let me stop for just 2 seconds. Um, Ashley, check the question board and just see if anything's there.
We do. We have two that just popped up. So Barbara asks, how can I, as a recruiter, differentiate between millennials and Gen Z just from a resume, which typically are not up to date for anyone? So yeah, so that's a good question.
Well, thank you, Barbara. That's a fantastic question. One is, if you're into communicating with them, you know, finding out more about what makes them unique. And, again, you don't want to get into ageism on the top end or the bottom end of ageism. You don't want to dance around anything that's improper or illegal. But how do you distinguish is the questions that they ask, the things that are important to them. And some of this is going to be painfully clear in Gen Z because they expect the world to be completely modeled after them and highly personalized. Millennials aren't quite as much that way. There are certain things that they care about, but the world doesn't completely revolve around them, and they're not as highly personalized. But so you can ask questions like that that are probative. It's like, okay, hey, listen, let's talk about communication. How do you like communication? Do you want me to call you? Do you want me to text you? Do you want me to, like asking questions like that? You can start to kind of figure it out without asking age, which you can't do, without asking, gender or sexual orientation or religion, which you shouldn't ask any of those types of things. You can kind of start figuring out the puzzle though, by asking probative questions of how they like communication, how they like feedback. What do they think about training? So you can kind of figure it out, Barbara. But I think some of it takes a discussion. You might not be able to figure it out from the resume per se, or even LinkedIn profile. You might not be able to find that out by just looking at the LinkedIn profile. You can, look at graduation dates, and that might give you an idea of where they land generationally. But again, I think some of that just boils down to, once you find them interesting, and as you find them in the pool of interesting, then probatively asking them how they like things. And then that will then start giving you clues as to where they fit. Great question. Fantastic question, actually.
Thank you so much, William. We did have a question about data to support the
Mhm.
webinar, so I'll send that your way after the webinar, if that's okay, and
Yeah,
respond
that's
outside
fine.
of it.
That's
And
fine.
thank you so much for that as well, Barbara. So how is the correct channel to change the mindset that millennials are now filling, or soon they will be filling out positions of management in a company?
So repeat the question just really quickly. Let me make sure I get it.
How is the correct channel to change the mindset that millennials are now filling, or soon they will be filling out positions of management in a company? She says
So
this is hard to understand from other generations.
there's no doubt. So um, I think they understand the question of, okay, they're aspiring into leadership positions. What's different about them in leadership positions as opposed to Gen X or boomers, right?
Yes, I believe so. And just how to explain that to people, I guess.
Well, how to explain that to
That's the way I
leadership
got it.
is, yeah, it's
Yes.
how to explain that to leadership is, you know, with millennials, again, being broadsided on the recruiting side with millennials, it's the same thing in leadership. We can be blindsided by them in leadership and often are blindsided by them in leadership because we don't ask questions. If we don't ask those three questions that we didn't or don't ask in recruiting, those questions are still important to them. It's not like just because they've, 7 years into their career that those questions aren't important. So the what's next, how are you going to praise me? How are you going to make me better? Those things are still there. And so I think explaining that to leadership and the executive team and the board is probably it's a hard job because they don't understand because they didn't come from that place. But at the same time, that's our responsibility to then say, okay, here's the things that they need. It's a question of, are we going to provide that for them? So on the front door, candidate to employee, those are important. Employee, let's say for a couple of years, now going into leadership, those things are still important. And I think one of the things to add to that, and we'll do that with Gen Z, is they think more, millennials and Gen Z think more in gigs than they do in jobs. So like we talk with an old-fashioned language of career and job and things like that. We use an older language where they don't use that particular language. So I think another way of thinking of this is like, okay, they want to go into leadership. We're going to put them through a leadership training program, and here's the things that we need to make sure that they get out of that, because this is what's important to them. And not cookie cutter. Such a great question. I don't think we got the name on who asked that, but that's such a great question because I think one of the things to make that extra special for those folks is to personalize it for them. Like you're going into leadership. We want you to go into leadership. We need you to go into leadership. You've shown that you have the potential of being a great leader. What do you need to surround you to make sure that you're a great leader? What can we do? Here are the options. Like here are some of the things that have worked in the past with other people. What would you like? And what would be beneficial to you? So I think that, those three questions, important, check. The second is just making sure that we ask them. We're in the era, this is kind of a little bit meta, but bear with me. We're in the era of consent. We don't realize it fully yet, but this era where we just ask. It's okay to ask. It doesn't show any form of weakness or anything like that. Like there's no negative connotation. It's just, hey, how would you like this? How would you like this? You're going to go into leadership. We want you to go into leadership. You've said you've wanted to go into leadership. How would you like to do that? There's many paths. There's 5 different ways to do it. Here's the ways that people have done it most recently. What do you think would fit you the best? Like those are okay and often required ways of approaching millennials into leadership. And the flip side of that is not assuming that they want to be leaders. So I think one of the things we got caught up with Gen X is that we assumed that everyone wanted to be a leader, that you just kind of went from one level to the next like a game, and you wanted to get to the top of the heap. You wanted to be at the highest level. It's not true of millennials. It's not true of Gen Z either. So let's not make that mistake. Let's ask, hey, do you see yourself? Do you want to? And again, if they say yes, then it becomes a game of, okay, well, there's a lot of different ways we can help prepare you and get you to where have a level of success. So great question. Fantastic. Both questions. Fantastic. Let's go to slide 15. So Gen Z, and for this particular discussion, is 95 to 2010. So the oldest being 23, that's college recruiting, entry-level positions, and the youngest being 8 years old. I have 2 sons squarely in this zone, 9 and 12. And so some of this makes a lot of anecdotal sense to me because I see it every day. Next slide. This is the group, and I hate the concept or the words digital natives, but this is the first generation to never not know the internet. Okay, so this generation, Gen Z, there was never a moment of their life where there wasn't an internet. Digital, visual, entrepreneur, the worlds are blurred. Like where we would think in terms of work-life balance, they don't think like that. There's work and there's play, or there's things that aren't work, and those things can be done simultaneously. There's not like we look for the special recipe of how to balance these things out. They don't look for that recipe. In fact, they don't even believe there's a recipe for those things. They kind of mock us in a way for even thinking that there is a balance between work and life. So it's really interesting. And again, these different than millennials, very individualistic. And some of this is going to make sense as I explain. Next slide. Let's say that. So this group of people have grown up in apps. So swipe computing, touch computing, excuse me, voice computing, downloading apps and using it for a little while and then Xing out of it or deleting it, etc. That, watching YouTube videos, watching other kids play games on YouTube, normal. This is that generation where they're not freaked out by bots. Like a bot pops up and asks a question, that's normal. Like that's table stakes for them. So we think of that as avant-garde. Millennials are a little bit more accustomed to it. Gen Z, not even an issue, not even a thought. Like, oh yeah, it's a bot. Here you go. Here's your answer. And again, this is that group of people different than millennials. The older millennials can't imagine or can remember a world where there wasn't the internet. This group has never not been the internet. They've all had devices earlier than millennials and previous generations. Next slide. So one of the things that's really interesting, and we're going to get to this in the learns, is visual is very important to them because they've grown up with an aesthetic, a UI and a UX, if you will, for life that previous generations didn't grow up with. So visual is more important to them in a way than in all previous generations. And another thing that again they can kind of they grew up with Instagram and Snapchat and different programs that are more visually oriented, Pinterest, and those are normal for them. Whereas other generations didn't grow up with that. That wasn't kind of the first that came along. So they're very visually inclined, and that's going to be important here in a second. 19, next slide. They've grown up with the Mark Zuckerbergs and we'll just kind of, Uber, Lyft, Facebook, Minecraft, Fortnite, all of these people that they quote unquote know that have made something. Minecraft and Fortnite are great examples of this. They've made something, people play it or do it, and then they sell that to somebody else and they make a ton of money. They see that as a model of not just how to get wealthy, but just like that's a model of how to do things. Like my son, my oldest son, is thinking about creating games, but he wants to create Christian-based games. And he's looked at the market. There's not a lot of Christian-based games, and he's looking at it like an entrepreneur, and he's saying, well, there's not a lot of this. There's a lot of people that are Christian. Why don't we just make Christian games? I'm like, yeah, sounds great. Like, that's an idea at 13 that I would have never had, clearly. And millennials might have been on the cusp or might have been there a little bit, but this is natural and normal for Gen Z to have entrepreneurial thoughts and be entrepreneurial. So how does that impact us in the business? Well, we have to be entrepreneurial with them. So that's, again, getting into the mentality of like, yeah, this is a gig. Once you do this gig, after you do this gig, then we got another gig. And after that gig, we got this other gig. So that we talk to them in the way that they're accustomed to seeing gig after gig after gig. That could all be in one company, but it's a gig. It's a gig. It's one thing to the next. Next slide. So again, it's this work-life concept that's laughable. That they literally they can multitask. Like my son can, be doing something on YouTube and listening to me at the same time, and he's heard every word, got everything from me, still watching the video. And it's because they grew up that way, hardwired to be able to do these things together. And so their worlds are blurred. I don't think they're ever not going to be blurred. And so that what we have to understand is like this concept of our work-life balance, pushing that on them isn't necessary. If they want it, great. If they desire it, if it's important to them, fantastic. But if it's not, then don't. Like we need to be able to, and go ahead and go to the next slide, Ashley. Um, we need to be able to wrap this around them, which gets us naturally to this. They're very individualistic. So like the cookie cutter stuff that we've become accustomed to in HR doesn't work. They sniff it out fast, and they want things highly personalized because that's how the life has been dealt to them, and they're very individualistic, and they want things that fit them. Everything. So like coming into that first day, do you want a Mac or a PC? Do you want a tablet? Do you want this? Do you need a smartphone? Do you need, what do you like that structural part that we've kind of said, okay, everyone gets a PC or everyone gets a Mac or everyone does this. Like we've got to stop doing that with this generation because it's not going to, it won't work. They're accustomed to being able to say, yeah, I want a Mac and a PC, or I want an iPad and I want a PC because I want to be able to do both, work on both. We've got to think about them being more individualistic than any generation we've ever contended with, both in recruiting and in HR. All right, so let's just go ahead and go to slide 23.
Okay, well, we have a question. Are you ready for one? I
I
love this
am,
question.
but go to slide 23 while we're doing that.
Okay, so Diane asks, does this mean that the non-exempt compensation model will need to be reworked to adjust to different kind of work cadence?
Absolutely. Great question, Diane.
Yes.
It's almost like in India, they have this concept of micro promotions. About every 3 to 6 months that you get a promotion, and it's micro promotions. Same thing kind of works here, is that they've got to see traction like that, not just that they're doing well, but that we recognize that they've changed and done the job and gotten better at the job. And so like our like everything in HR is changing all the way down to its core and its foundation. So compensation, which is what you're bringing up, fundamentally, it has to change. Like our standards and the way that we think of standards get blown out of the water. So, which is going to create it's going to create different problems for us because we're accustomed to having standards for everything. In fact, we've fallen in love with standards. I need to get into these because I want y'all to make sure that y'all have these. We got about 6 minutes. So differences. We'll go through this very quickly. Gen Z, they've digital natives. If you remember nothing, remember that they've had the internet their entire life. They've had voice computing. My son does his homework with Alexa, and it's not cheating. And that's normal. And so we have to think about that as we recruit them, as we engage them, and as we retain them. We have to think about that. This is a group of people that have never not had the internet. Okay, go to the next slide, please. So the most important part here is probably the fourth point is they don't see they don't see kind of the difference both between work and non-work, but they're also a risk averse in a way because they've seen people fail Like that entrepreneurial model that we talked about. I just talked about the positive stories. They've also seen the negative stories too. People that have amassed wealth and then lost it all. And so they've seen all that at a very early age, and it's impacted them, and so it's impacted some of their risk tolerance. And it's also interesting around soft skills with Gen Z, because while they might have stronger technical skills, some of the harder skills, they might not look you in the eye, and that's normal. Like they might not shake your hand in a way that is normal. So the softer skills are problematic for Gen Z, because that's again not how they grew up. Harder skills easier for them because it is how they grew up. All right, let's get 26 and 27 in. Okay, and here is really, really, really interesting. So two things I want you to get on this one, and again, you're gonna get the slide deck, so don't worry about taking notes. Experiment with them now. So let's not get blindsided by them, right? Let's start experimenting with them in the office now. Like you already have some people in their low 20s that work in the office. Start trying things with them. Like what works. That's one thing, is start that rather than us waiting a decade like we did with millennials. Let's get ahead of this by starting earlier. Secondly, one of the things in the recruiting process that came out that's very interesting is in the recruiting process, they want to see people like them, which is something that hasn't really kind of come out of the research in with millennials and former generations, is they want to see a gal or a guy their age in the recruiting process. So like college recruiting, we used to send, our best college recruiters, regardless of age or any of that stuff, we'd send them off to do the college recruiting. With this particular generation, that kind of works. They want to see people that are like them because they know that they're different. And if you don't have people, if they don't see people like them, then they don't know if you know how to deal with people like them. Okay. So very important that you send people and have them as a part of that entire recruitment process that are like them, that they see that. All right, next slide. So the most important thing here is probably the second to the last thing that that I want to make sure that we kind of get, is that with Gen Z, they love challenges. Absolutely, they live by them, love them. They love challenges because they've played games all their life, and so they're accustomed. So we need to think about, like, in games, what do we learn in games, and challenging and rewarding are things that we learn in games. In Fortnite, let's say, we want to be challenged them, and at the same time, when they do something really well, we want to be able to recognize that. Two things that I want to make sure that you get. You can go ahead and go all the way to the context slide. Okay, attention span. It's in here. We didn't really get into it too much, but on average, millennials, and again, that's age 23 to 38, right? On average, they have a 12-second attention span. Okay, and Gen Z, 8 to 23, they have an average 8-second attention span. Okay, so somewhere in the delta between those two generations, we've lost 4 seconds of attention span. I'm not sure where or how, but we lost it. It's never coming back. Now, how does that impact us? That impacts us in every facet of HR, but let's just deal with the recruiting part. That 2,300 word job description that you posted on Career Builder, as a Gen X, I would read that. I'd fight my way through it. I'd write notes in the columns. Like, I'd do all that. Gen Z will not do that. Like, you have to think in job descriptions and tweets and visuals. So when we think about that attention span, like you think about it later on today or tonight, I want you to think about like, how do I deal with the fact that the people that I'm recruiting or engaging as employees or trying to retain as top talent as employees, they've got attention spans that are 12 seconds to 8 seconds, somewhere in between those two. And it's different. 4 seconds is a it's a lot more. And so I suggest when I talk to recruiters, think in tweets. Like think in tweets, write in tweets, interact with them in tweets, be able to consume and distribute content in tweets. Not using Twitter per se, but thinking in that type of, here, I don't need to give you a master's thesis. I don't need to give you 2,300 job descriptions. I can put a billboard up in Silicon Valley that says software engineer, $285,000. Here's the link to apply. Like that actually would work because it gives the basics of what they need to learn. That gives them a place to go learn more about it, and it fits their attention span. So we didn't get too deep into attention span, but because it changes everything for us, but it's very important. And we're a little bit over. I apologize, probably due to our technical difficulty earlier. Ashley, is there anything we need to do before we wrap?
Well, just a big, huge thank you. And if anyone has any questions you'd like to ask before we close, just send them my way. If you have any questions about the webinar that you think of after, feel free to send those to Ashley at recruitingdaily.com and I'll forward them on. But thank you all so much. Thank you, William. That was a lot of information to squeeze into an hour. That was fantastic.
It was fun. And again, this research is changing. What's great about it, y'all, as we're just now at the very, very beginning of learning about Gen Z. So we're
Yes.
gonna wake up in a month from now, read a new report, and then be able to add to it. And that's okay. That's okay. Let's not wait a decade to then learn about this generation, because this is a really magical, really fun generation, and we need to reorient our business around them rather than trying to get them to reorient themselves around us.
I think it's brilliant. I love the mention of video games and the reward, the immediate
Yeah,
reward.
yeah.
I've heard that from psychologists as well, that it works really well in this generation because of what they're used to. So I think it's really cool to bring that up. Anyway, thank you. Thank you everyone so much for being here. We'll cut off so we don't eat into your day, but appreciate you so much for being here. Thank you to great people, and thank you to William. And thank you, and thank you, and thank you. I could go on all day. Everyone have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.